Yeah, now it's, yeah, that's
Okay.
it. You're done. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So now I need to also share back to this step. So here we go. And one more step and we might be there. Am I there?
You're there. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Brilliant. So the focus of our evening is on, are they okay? So helping siblings cope with loss. And I suppose it is a question that's asked a lot of me from the parents of, are they okay? Are they okay with the focus being on their well-being? So we are going to talk today a little bit about grief, because I think it's important just to name the different grief responses that we do have, not just children, but then drill down into maybe how siblings' grief can be different and the developmental differences at different ages. We're going to look at what helps, and I'm going to try and dot some kind of strategies throughout as well that may help them to understand the process of grief for them as well. And then the importance of minding self, which is so important. And then the question and answers section at the end. So hopefully it'll be informative for you, and that it will be around 30 minutes in total of me presenting, and then there'll be lots of times for questions and answers. But also equally, if anyone has any question, want to put their hand up throughout, keeping in mind that it is being recorded, you can do that also. So the important thing to remember, and I think for every child, any type of imagery or metaphors or visuals are very helpful for them to understand. And grief really is unique for every person. Even though grief is universal, we all have a unique experience, and this is as unique as our fingerprints. So it means that we can experience different aspects of our grief at different times. So there's no real timeline. It can be impacted by so many things, and especially for younger people, because of different developmental stages and different transitions in their lives, it can just be experienced even more differently. And I suppose we often hear about working through grief, and the old traditions around grief would really talk about how you're working through different stages of anger, shock, denial, bargaining, not particularly in that order, but it made it look and feel as if grief should be very, very neat. And as we know, grief is really, really messy, just like the second part of this picture. And I think it's really important and it helps children in particular to understand that process, that it can be up and down, in and out. It's very messy, and that it is about them being able to understand that and also to trust their own grief responses as they occur. So we often hear of people, who don't understand griefs, maybe saying, you're moving past a particular stage now, or it's a year out, so it might feel different now. But really, we really have to keep in mind that it's so unique for us. And unless you've experienced, you can't understand that messiness, or that it isn't a moving past grief, it's a moving forward with grief. So for all of us, this is the grief responses that we can have. So at any age. So sometimes I think younger people feel that sadness is one of the main symptoms or responses to grief. But there is a whole range of physical and emotional and behavioral and social responses to grief. And as I said, we're also unique. We can experience them differently at different times. In particular, we find that earlier on, especially, there can be a lot of fatigue, grief being so heavy, and change of appetite, weight gain or loss, lower immunity because of our grief response, and sleep difficulties. So these are all very somatic feelings of grief. And I suppose what we find also is if a child has experienced this loss of their sibling, they may actually manifest some of those aches and pains that their sibling may have had. And as we also understand from younger children in particular, tummy pains. So tummy pains when we're feeling worried, but we do hold our feelings in different parts of our body. And for a young child to understand that can be so helpful, because we experience maybe our sadness in our chest, which makes us feel very, very heavy. We may feel our anxiety in their belly. So for helping them to understand that relationship between our feelings and our physical symptoms can be very, very helpful for them. Emotion is a whole roller coaster, and I think that's helpful for them to understand as well, that it's not simply sadness. There's so many different emotions that are coming along with it. Shock and disbelief, guilt, fear for themselves, fear for other family members, anger, relief, loneliness and depression. So there can be a whole range of different feelings that can be felt at the same time or at different times. And that as well, I use that that picture of the messiness of that's, that it's not linear, the last one that I showed you, to help them understand that there's so many different feelings. It's really messy. They're all tied up together. In terms of behavioral, as I talked already, we talked about sleep changes, appetite changes, concentration difficulties that can be really felt in school a lot. So a teacher might say they're looking out the window, they can't concentrate, their grades may change. We might hear that there's restlessness or hyperactivity. For older kids, it can be more increased alcohol use or drug use, maybe to numb some of those different feelings. Making poor choices as well, so more at-risk behaviors for them. And then socially, we have seek company or withdrawal from company, wanting to talk, wanting not to talk, avoiding places or topics that maybe connect them with their different emotional feelings of grief, and then more sensitive about what people say or think. And all of these, I think, is really important for them to understand that these are all very normal responses to grief. So that understanding can be so helpful for them to understand how they're feeling and what's happening for them at a particular time. Because if we understand that we're going through a different stage or wave of grief, then it can help us to say, instead of saying, what's wrong with me, and being self-critical with ourselves, it can actually help us to say, this is my grief response. Now that I'm feeling like this, what is going to help? So children can have slightly different grief responses. They dip in and out of emotions a little bit differently. That doesn't stay with them the same way. One moment they may be immersed in sadness or immersed in frustration related to grief, and then the next minute they're off playing with their friends. So it can be very much dipping in and dipping out, which is very appropriate for their developmental stage and even their brain's development stage, because it's only in our teens to the age of about 25 that our prefrontal cortex is developed. So we don't even have that capacity to do a lot of that planning, coordination, and executive functioning that we have later on in life. So that means that they're more present in the moment. So when they're even connecting with their grief, they're connecting about it in the moment. They're not like maybe older kids or teenagers or young adults or adults experience that experience of feeling not only the grief right now in the moment, but also the different griefs ahead at the times where they're going to connect with their sibling not being there with them. Children may try and protect parents from their pain and upset. That sometimes can happen, and sometimes not. So again, it can be very individual. But what we'll find is if they're experiencing grief, they may not mask it in school. So that's why it's always vital for school and for their friends, parents or other family members to be aware, to keep an eye out and to feed back to you if they feel they have any worries or any concerns, because they won't be able to mask in all situations, but they may be protecting you and masking at home. They may try to control their grief because it's really hard to experience and very confusing. And so they're holding on to it and pretending that nothing has happened. So again, that might manifest maybe in aches and pains in their tummy, in behavioral changes such as sleep or appetite changes, or social withdrawal, or want to be more with their friends. So you'll notice it come out in different ways. Grief in childhood and teens make a young person feel very different from their peers. And that's really so important for them, that their identity, especially as older children, that identity and being similar to their peers being so important. And maybe also the frustration about them maybe not understanding their experience. Sibling grief may have additional feelings also of resentment. And this may be almost, carried over from a time where, first of all, they resented maybe all the attention that their sibling had to receive, which they understand, but there has been this bit of element of resentment of the amount of times that they haven't had maybe you available to them. Or it may be resentment at friends, that they feel that they have not experienced what they've experienced, and that they have their family and all their siblings healthy. They also may experience guilt that they've had these feelings of resentment or frustration with their sibling at times, and guilt that they have maybe survivor's guilt that they're here today and their sibling isn't. And also maybe feelings of anxiety that might occur for them, of worry for themselves now as well, or for other family members. And as I said, when we talk about those maybe different aches and pains that can occur in their grief, that maybe might connect them with, am I okay? Am I healthy? So overall, for every child, the way that we can support them, no matter what developmental stage they are at, is encourage asking questions, continuing memories, letting them know that they can ask for help at any time, and offering them reassurance. And that's no matter what age that they are. Helping them understand that there's many emotions of grief and a roller coaster of emotions. Creating a culture at home that all questions are okay, even if you don't have the answers. And I think that's the important part, that the main thing is that we're validating questions. So a question may come at a time where you don't feel you have the ability to answer it, or don't have the time to answer it, or don't even have the emotional capacity to answer it right then for yourself because of your own grief. So it can be that validating questions is enough at a time, and letting them know that you'll come back to them on that question, and being authentic, saying, I don't have the answer right now, or I don't even have the capacity to answer you right now, but we will come back and we'll talk about it, and I'm glad you're asking questions. Always answer questions age appropriately honest. And it is about, we can often go into, as a parent, wanting to fix. So we often want to maybe soothe those difficult feelings that they're having, or maybe offer them reassurance. So we're kind of jumping ahead in any of those answers that we come up against. So it is about taking your time, being slow in your answer, and making sure that it's age appropriate for them. And the best way to do that is let them guide the questions. So you're asking about this. I'm curious, what do you mean by that question? So it is taking a very, very step-by-step answer, maybe answering exactly what they ask without moving ahead too far. So let them take the lead. Just get curious with them, give them that space to ask questions. And as I mentioned earlier, seeking feedback from schools and clubs, either ones that they have been involved in, or if they start attending new ones, maybe let them know that you want them to keep an extra eye out for them just to see how they're coping. Make time as a family to talk and to create rituals. And that's irrespective of the age of the child. I suppose the rituals might be dependent on the age, but most certainly the capacity and the space for creating rituals is very important. And I suppose coming up to Christmas, it can be really important to plan as a family how you want to experience this Christmas. That it doesn't have to be a particular way, or it doesn't have to be the way that it was maybe in the past. That once you speak about it as a family and tease through it together, what will we create? Not putting any pressure on anyone, making it the same or different, It's about just having those conversations together and seeing what you're able for. Maintain time specifically for them if possible, giving them one-on-one time that is focused on what's happening in their lives at that particular time. And respecting different grief responses and coping styles. We all have different ones irrespective of age. So again, it's allowing to see and connect it with, if it's connecting with their capacity and it's connecting with their coping styles. If their particular coping style or particular personality style, maybe they do it their particular way. Maybe they're a child that needs to go away and have some quiet time themselves, maybe having some sadness time themselves and come back. So if that's the style they always used, then that's the best style for them if it's working for them. So it's really what we want to make sure is that they're being their usual selves. If their coping styles they used in the past are ones they're still using, then we know that they're coping well. So it's only when we see variability from themselves that we start maybe, getting curious about what else is happening. So at any age, this can be very useful, looking at grief like waves in a stormy sea. And that we would hope over time, at the very beginning, waves can feel so intense and so close together, and they can knock us off our feet. And with time, the hope would be that those waves are maybe a little less severe and maybe more predictable. And yet sometimes, which is really important for them to understand, that a wave can come out of nowhere when we least expect it. But the important thing is that they understand that process. So when it happens, they understand that it's grief that they're experiencing now. So let's drill down into some more of the developmental differences for different ages. Remembering back what helps for all ages, but then to look at each stage in its own as well. So for 4 to 8 years, early primary school children, the reaction, it can be initial shock, maybe followed by very little reaction. Some children may experience night terrors, trouble sleeping, tears, separation anxiety, repeating the same questions and maybe expect their sibling who has died to come back. So it's at that stage where they are just starting to understand the permanence of death. What's really important for them to know is using words like died and dead to help them understand that their sibling is not coming back. Because we can often use words like gone to sleep, and those can be very abstract. For a young child, they prefer concrete thinking. So for them to understand that is very important, because I suppose if they don't have that understanding and they don't have that template, then we often hear in younger children that maybe they're worried that what if their loved one woke up in the coffin, and would they be scared? Would they be hungry? So for them to really understand that the body dies and that they won't come back to life and that they can't feel any pains or worry or fear anymore. So that's really important for them to understand that in a concrete way. Children may regress, and this can be any age, but in particular at this age, of wanting to sleep in your bed and looking for extra comfort. And that's good. That's, it's allowed, it's important to go with that, to give them the extra comfort they need at a particular time. And that is something that regression will change with time. So, sometimes we can feel that if I set up this bad habit, it might be difficult to break it again. But going with what they need at that particular time can be very important. For older children, 9 to 12-year-old, they may have a lot more specific questions about their siblings' illness and death. And they may not want to participate in games and sports with their peers. They may be unsure if it's okay to have fun. So that's really important for them to know that they can get involved, that at one moment they can be sad or they can be frustrated, and the next moment they can be enjoying whatever activity they are with their friends as well. They also may avoid talking about siblings at this stage. The best way to support them is to make sure that they develop new friendships and explore new activities. And again, if these are new schools and activities that they are involved in, that you let them know that keep an extra eye out for them. Acknowledge a difficult transition from primary school to secondary school and celebrate this achievement with them. Because what we find is any transition, and even a good transition, it's a change, and change connects us with our grief. So really can, almost just like an invisible thread between all our grief experiences or our adjustment experiences. And so it can bring up their grief very fresh in that period of adjustment and transition from primary school to secondary school. For you to understand that, and for them to have an understanding of that, can help them understand if they have these extra challenging feelings at that time. And to remind them that the extra additional challenges they experience as a result of grief is not their fault, that these are the typical grief reactions that most of us have. For teenagers for 13 years plus, they're already coping with lots of changes in their lives that come with moving to secondary school and puberty. Frustration, anger, a sense of great unfairness, and overwhelming anxiety are all emotions that be common to this age, both features of adolescence and of grieving. So I suppose it's important to be able to differentiate between whether it is a normal teenage response right now that they're going through, or if it's grief, or it might be a combination of both. So the processing of grief was also experienced significant development shifts, can be intense, and there is a challenge, but also normal. So try to be patient and understanding at this stage, that there can be just that surge in behaviors. Asking questions and listening more than giving guidance is really important at this age. And asking them what's helpful for them. So helping them to, first of all, being able to share how they're feeling and letting them guide and just listening. And which can be very difficult as a parent because we do want to go into fixing. But we also want to make sure that we're helping them to name it for themselves, identify it for themselves, and also asking them what's helpful, because they may have coping strategies are working for them. They may not be the same as ours. And we also may be learning from their coping strategies. So really it is about being present and listening to them and letting them to guide you. Have realistic expectations of performances and grades, which may fluctuate for a period of time. And again, the school awareness is very important. Remind self-critical teens that the extra challenges of grieving, in addition to coping with the challenges of being a teen, is not their fault. Give them time to see their friends, as peers are so important to them at this stage. And they may actually want more peer interaction than they have in the past. And that may some way be them, first of all, it's that stage of wanting more autonomy, more independence, and feeling more connection with their peers. But also they may want to take respites from their grief. So they may want to spend more time out of the house with their peers, which is very healthy. Regularly offer opportunities to talk to you without putting too much pressure on them to do so. So just creating the space. Early teens and young adults 15 plus can be a little bit different as well. So early teens may show diminished interest and an active avoidance of information about their siblings' illness, treatment, and death. They can experience muted anticipatory grief, so may not really connect with their grief at that stage. They want privacy as they develop their own identity, so it might be a time where they're less likely to talk, and that may not be that they're withdrawing in their grief. It may simply be age appropriate. Young teens may talk with friends more readily than with their parents, and this needs changes in late adolescence, where what we find is as they have more of those peer relationships established, they may come back to speak more in almost an adult way with parents around their feelings. They do not like to be seen as different from their peers, and some friends may shy away, which is equally as difficult for them. They may avoid feelings. Avoidance of feelings is also common at this stage. In older young adults, we may find that mourning takes place in a more adult manner. Their anticipatory mourning is experienced first, followed by more persistent and prolonged periods of mourning after death. They may mourn future grief also, as I spoke about earlier, around our prefrontal cortex, and that we're more likely at a later stage to be actually connecting with all the different grief experiences in their lives ahead. They may set high expectations for themselves. And I suppose that is sometimes maybe wanting to not worry you or to prove that they're okay. And it's about maybe giving them, naming that to them, that maybe that they can give themselves permission to not set their expectations too high for themselves, or that the expectations they set are for them alone. They develop deeper peer relationships, both with parents, of being able to come back and talk more deeply around how they're feeling, but also with friends and partners. And it is a stage where they're in the process of planning for their own future. There's new transitions into further education and employment and moving out of home. So these are a lot of transitions for both them, which may also connect them with their grief, but also for you. I think this is a lovely metaphor to help us understand when there's a lot of anger present, especially for the teens and young adults. That champagne bottle metaphor of once you shake a champagne bottle, the cork flies out. So the cork signifies the answer, but inside is the grief and pain. And that might be fear-based and the more difficult feelings that they don't want to connect with. So if you find that your teen may be more angry than they typically were, and you feel that it's associated with their grief, then maybe it is, about helping them to understand that, or even having more patience yourself with them around your understanding of that. So all I have spoken about so far is really a very normative response to grief that ebbs and flows over time. So all these are normal responses. When we want to be a little bit more concerned or worried, do we need to maybe have more support for them? Is when a child shows persistent, and persistent really is the word for each of these, that when those normative grief responses that ebb and flow, if they stick, if they're there all the time, and over a period of time, we're talking over a period, if you were to look at the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual for psychiatric diagnosis, we would say that it would have to be persistently there for a number of months. So you would never say that someone would have a prolonged grief response if it was under 12 months for an adult and under 6 months for a child. So it'd have to be over 6 months or over 12 months. But this would be very, like, where their capacity to function on a daily basis would be very impacted. So even these here would say that these examples are not that it's a clinical concern, but concerns around maybe they're a little stuck in their grief and those responses are not shifting, so that they're more persistent responses. So when a child shows persistent anxiety, when a child is persistently aggressive, when they socially withdraw from friends and activities. Now, if a child carries self-blame and guilt about the death, or self-destructive and risk-taking behavior, such as self-harm, suicidal behavior, or excess alcohol and drug use. So parents' concerns that we hear all the time are they okay? Am I missing something? Will it cause lifelong trauma? What do I say? Am I being emotional around them, and will this harm them? And am I giving them too much responsibility? If they're experiencing any of the normative responses and they're not staying stuck in those responses for a persistent period of time, they are okay. If they are not them, if they're their usual self. So if a busy child is still busy, if a quiet child is still quiet, then if they're being their usual self, what you really want to look out for is their sleep changed? Is their appetite changed? Are others mentioning concerns? And that's when you'll know if you're not missing something, if you're getting no concerns from other people and they're being their usual self. The way that we navigate our grief together and the modeling that you do and authenticity you do around your grief and sharing your grief responses is really helpful to prevent long-term trauma because you're working together through it as a family. And what you do say, you can give them some of these examples. You tell them how you're feeling. You talk about your grief. You normalize grief responses. You share things that are helping you with your grief. You give them time, you give them space and patience. And you don't feel you have to fix it. You journey with them. Am I being emotional around them? That's really important to be emotional. So you're authentic in your grief. Again, I suppose, is if we are persistently emotional, then maybe we need to access other supports or who else is there to support us. We don't want them to be our main supporters. Am I giving them too much responsibility? Really, if you're thinking about that, it means that you're aware of it. And it really is about, just having that check-in with yourself. Is it age appropriate what they're doing right now? Have you, asked them, are they felt they have too much responsibility? Depending on the age of the child. So what helps? Hopefully some of the things I mentioned before already have helped, but really talking about your grief, modeling your own grief is really important. Sometimes parents feel that they're going to hide that from them, but this is the best way for them to understand. Modeling is the best way for them to understand, to see it, and to know it, and to know that it's okay. Encourage questions. And as I said, you don't have to have the answers. It's about validating those questions and coming back with age-appropriate answers when you can. Because often we will find that we'll get questions asked when maybe the timing isn't right. It might be in the car and you're rushing off somewhere, or it might be something else is going on, or you just don't have the capacity yourself. So allow yourself to have that time and space that you can revisit. And the revisit can happen at any time. Sometimes we might be kind of a curveball in terms of what's asked of us, and you say it's a really good question. Or sometimes maybe you won't because you just don't have it in you right then. But you can always go back and go, remember you were talking about that last week. I was thinking. And that for them can be so valuable that you're holding them in mind and that you're exploring their grief with them also, that you're trying to figure it out together. So that can be really important. And then the most important thing is ask them, especially with the older children, ask them how they're doing, what they're thinking. Continuing bonds approach is one of the more contemporary approaches we use for grief. And it takes us away from that kind of linear model I talked about before around the different stages, which was very neat. Continuing bonds is us continuing to have a relationship with our loved one. And that's why it can be so important to talk about when we feel able to talk about memories and to create memories and create rituals. Dual process model is also a contemporary model, and that really is looking at almost like a pendulum. If we were a pendulum and we swing back and forth between loss or grief and then swing to the other area of our lives where we're looking at new parts of our lives or reconnecting with different parts of our lives. So it is about us swinging from the present moment to our grief, back and forth over time. And the hope would be in time that at the beginning you can feel that it's all within the loss orientated section, the blue section. But over time, we might connect with new things or other parts of us in the lavender phase. And over time, this can maybe hopefully get a balance between more in restorative and fluctuating back to loss at different times as well. So we're back and forth. With children, it can be really useful to use some of the Disney movies. There's so many Disney movies that speak about death of a loved one. So it can be a really helpful way of maybe helping to understand through conversation, through chats as you watch a movie, what their understanding of grief is, or the understanding of death, or understanding of different emotions, and what helps them in their grief. This can be a lovely one as well to use to help them understand that messiness, the tangled ball of emotions, so that they understand that it's not simply a sadness. That can be all these different ones that are very normal in grief. Now, this is an adult one. Well, it's a teen. I've had lots of teenagers use it, but adults as well. There is another version that I can share with you for younger children, but it can be a very useful way of even like if you're using it yourself to color in different threads and different colors. And it can help them maybe, like having it there on the table for them to see it over time and be able to understand it. And I've often used it as a tool for teenagers and young adults around helping them, they color in their different feelings, and then we can speak about the different feelings, why that's coming up for you, why is that coming up for you, so they can help them to maybe to articulate why those different feelings are there. Another lovely tool to use with children is looking at them, seeing that we learn to accommodate into our lives over time. So it's not that our grief changes, but that our lives grow around it, so that they can connect with other parts of their lives and know that that's okay, that they can start new things and that's okay. So there are lots of supports, and a lot of children don't need additional supports outside their families or their loved ones and friends and community to help them with their grief. But also there are different services available, including ours, that are available locally and nationally. So as most of you know, we have our play therapy and psychotherapy services for children and for young adults, and also individual sessions with myself for young adults and adults. Barrettstown, as most of you know, do a beautiful program, Weekends for Families. Hand in Hand also offers play therapy and psychotherapy support. Siblings Grief Club is for adult siblings, and it's an online support here in Ireland. Rainbows is a fantastic group support for children, typically held in communities, but also was online during the pandemic. And I do know there is an online version as well, and maybe a lot of it now, the online is specifically for parents. I'm not 100% sure if it's both still. You've got your local cancer support centres, hospice if you've been linked in, Bernardo's can be helpful also. The Children Grief Centre in Limerick is phenomenal, and also they may have some online supports now that since the pandemic as well. And the Irish Hospice Foundation can be very useful for information, not only for parents, but also for schools as well. There's lots of books as well. For parents, there's the Winston Wish series of books that you can get online or you can order, and you can use both for yourself. There's information there for you for supporting your child, but also there's aspects of it for a child as well. Barnardo's also have free ebooks that you can access online. And for children, there is a range of books as also. The Invisible String is possibly one of my favorite, and it looks at a continuing bonds approach of how we can still be connected to our loved ones. Also, Muddles, Puddles and Sunshine is phenomenal for, it is more creative in that you are, you can photocopy or you can use a book and you can color and you can talk through different experiences. Sad Isn't Bad is a lovely little one for understanding that sad is a healthy emotion that we experience and different ways that can help with that emotion. For teenagers, The Grieving Teen, a guide for teens and their friends, is very useful. What Am I Supposed to Do Now is another one for coping with teen grief. And a lot of the adolescent books would be more kind of workbooks or journals that they can also write on themselves. So it can be a lovely way for them to articulate how they're feeling. And the most important part of today is looking after yourself. We often think as parents that we put our children first, and if they're okay, we're okay. But all the evidence would say that it's really, really important that you look after you because then you're better able to support them as well. And also you're modeling the different ways that can help with your grief. So it's small baby steps around getting good sleep or working on sleep if it's being poor, having a balanced diet, getting fresh air, stretching. It's not that you have to put an exercise regimen in place, but getting out and getting some movement. Connecting with others is also very important. Being patient and gentle with yourself is vital. Asking for help from your children, from your community, from friends, from support services as needed. Trusting yourself and trusting yourself in your grief, understanding your grief, allowing yourself all those different emotions, and trusting that you have you're using coping strategies that are helpful for you. And also trusting in that you know your child, that you know if they're their usual self. And all those different behavioral, the sleep, the appetite, being their usual self is really important to help you to trust yourself, and also trusting putting boundaries in place. You know, it's still important that they have healthy boundaries that are going to help them at this stage. Routine is very important. So trusting that you can still use parenting strategies that you've always employed, even while in their grief. Creating routine for you and for them, and connecting with activities that were or are meaningful for you. And it may not be that they feel meaningful now, but trusting yourself that over time they may feel more meaningful, but it's going in a direction that, you know, and engaging with something that is good for you is very vital for you to do that for you, but also for your children to see you do that. So to summarize, acknowledge and share your own grief, encourage questions, normalize and validate the roller coaster of emotions that may occur, provide comfort and reassurance, and around those different behaviors as well. If they're feeling angry, it's okay to feel angry. So giving them that reassurance as well. It's part of your grief. Keep a watchful eye for any concerning behaviors that will let you know that they are stuck. But also you need to remember that, you know, to check in to see, is this developmentally appropriate? You know, is this the emotional roller coaster of being a teenager? And of that, you know, trying to be more autonomous. So, or is there school issues? Or is it a transition to third level or to work? So what are the different things that might be also in the mix? And most children navigate bereavement well without professional supports. And most importantly, look after you. So now we're taking some time for some questions and answers, and we're going to stop the recording. But just to share my email address with you all as well, and our phone number and our website. So at any time past this evening, any questions, please feel free to reach out to look at the different supports that are available.
So when you're stopping the recording there, Mairead, I'm just going to remind everyone and anyone that